Good morning, Senator. How are you?
Good, you. How you doing?
Good. I spent an hour and 10 minutes with David Sachs last night, and that interview is over at my podcast and my website. He a friend of yours?
He is. Yeah, he's a really good guy.
Very smart guy. I call him a neo-isolationist. What do you think of his views on Ukraine, China, and our defense spending?
Well, David and I sort of agree on the Ukraine question. I actually don't know his views on China or the broader defense question, but where I think he's basically right is that we don't have the industrial capacity because we've made a lot of bad decisions to focus on China and Ukraine simultaneously. We have either the Russian threat, we have the Chinese threat, and we can defend Ukraine or we can defend Taiwan, but I don't think that we can defend both with the current weapons production capabilities that we have. So in that world of limited resources, every time that we add another $25 billion to the amount that we're giving Ukraine, we are actually, without realizing it, making a decision to not focus on the East Asia theater. So I think he's right about that, and he and I have sort of had a lot of good conversations to that effect. I know you're on the other side of that, Hugh, but I really think that we have to ask ourselves, how long can we keep going with this?
And that's a little bit different from how he stated it, but I would recommend the podcast to you. He's a very smart guy. But I'm of the belief that we fix it by raising spending on defense dramatically back to Reagan levels of 5.3%. I am curious if you would do what Vivek did this week, which is draw a red line, a hard red line around Taiwan, but then promise to erase it as soon as we have semiconductor independence by 2028 or 2029.
Well, my question on the hard red line, I mean, look, I think we should defend Taiwan. I think that if the Chinese took Taiwan, it would be catastrophic. But look, let's be honest with ourselves and let's be realistic here. If the cost of defending Taiwan is 500,000 American lives, then of course we don't do it. The political will isn't there to do it. There's obviously no capacity for us to even, I think, devote that level of military resources to the island. If, however, we can increase the cost of China invading Taiwan, I think that's fundamentally has to be American policy here, is make it so costly they don't do it in the first place. And to do that, you really have to provide them with sufficient defensive weapons so that, they have hell to pay crossing the sea in the first place. And then once they try to establish a beachhead, likely in the southern part of the island, they have the sufficient artillery and other munitions to beat these guys back. So I think that's how you deal with the problem. I don't know how you can create a real red line without obviously committing America to potentially losing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Some very off-the-record defense people tell me we have submersible, non-signatory ability to sink their Roros, and that they can't blame us because we can't be traced. If that's true, should we use them?
Oh, of course we should. Of course
Okay.
we should. We should absolutely be willing to defend Taiwan against the Chinese attack. And I think that's a pretty broadly shared view within the Republican Party. But I also think that we have to be realistic. The best thing that we can do to defend Taiwan is to provide them sufficient defensive capabilities now, not after the Chinese have invaded. After the invasion starts, God forbid when that happens, our capacity, Hugh, is really limited. I mean, it's right next door to China. We obviously have allies in the region, but they're not even that close to Taiwan. We have limited capabilities with next-generation fighters. The fighter that we have doesn't – I think it's the best fighter in the world, but it also has limited range relative to some of our adversaries. So we have to be realistic here. And the simple fact is the best way to prevent China from taking Taiwan is to prevent the invasion from happening at all. Once it happens, America is at a huge strategic disadvantage.
True. Last question. We got less than a minute. Do we need a new Goldwater Nichols? Because we got 2 million civilian employees at the Pentagon, 1 million people in uniform, and no ability to contract, follow through, or in any way audit what the Pentagon is buying and how badly it's buying it.
Yeah, I think we do. I think we need a massive reform to our defense procurement process, Hugh. I mean, if you look at the amount the Chinese are paying to build a ship, it's depending on the estimate between 15 to 25% of what it's costing us to build a ship. And some of that's labor cost. Obviously, labor is cheaper in China, but most of that is things completely unrelated to labor where they should not have such an advantage over us. So we have a very, very messed up defense procurement capacity, and we need to look into why.
I hope you go in. I hope you do. In fact, the first big swing any Republican president ought to take is transforming the Pentagon into a modern business of the sort David Sachs wishes is there but isn't. J.D. Vance, always a pleasure to talk to you, Senator. Thank you for joining me.